Behind that classroom door, a war veteran stood frozen, not by bullets this time, but by the sound of laughter aimed at his own child. His little boy, Samuel, trembled on one arm and a trembling heart, while the teacher everyone called kind smiled as the room turned cruel. The father had seen men fall on battlefields before, but nothing prepared him for the moment his son became the target of silence that cuts deeper than war. If you believe no child should ever be shamed for being different, stay with this story. It's not just about cruelty or justice. It's about how love, courage, and one loyal dog named Max stood between darkness and a child's last bit of faith. Tell me where you're watching from. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story about kindness that still dares to fight back. May your night be peaceful and your heart brave. Morning fog clung to the valley like smoke that refused to leave the battlefield. The pines along Maple Ridge leaned into the gray, their needles heavy with dew, their silence older than prayer. On the narrow road cutting through them, an old green pickup moved slow, steady as a heartbeat that had learned caution. Raymond Cole's hands stayed tight on the wheel. His knuckles, pale against the worn leather, trembled only when the truck hit a patch of frost. The dog tag around his neck, faded thin from sand and years, clicked once, twice, a rhythm he had carried home from another war. Beside him, Samuel sat upright, his small frame swallowed by the seatbelt. The boy's left sleeve was pinned neatly at the shoulder, the right arm gone since the fire. He rarely spoke of it. Children, Raymond had learned, could bury grief deeper than adults ever could. The fire had taken his mother in one breath and his hand in another, and left behind a silence so perfect that even birds seemed to stop singing when they passed the coal cabin. In the back seat, Max shifted. The 4-year-old German shepherd, sable-colored and broad-chested, raised his head from the folded blanket and looked between them. His eyes moved like a question Raymond had no strength to answer. Once, Max had served beside soldiers who searched for mines. Now he searched for the unease that humans pretended not to feel. The truck climbed a last turn, and the sign appeared through mist. Maple Ridge Elementary, a place to grow. Raymond slowed, the tires crunching gravel. The phrase was carved cheerful in blue paint, but it landed on him like a dare. He muttered under his breath, "We'll see about that." Samuel's gaze lingered on the playground beyond the gate. The bright swings, the neat line of backpacks waiting by the door. He shifted his body closer to the window, pressing his small palm to the glass. The reflection that looked back was both boy and ghost. Raymond parked. For a long moment neither moved. The air smelled faintly of ash and pine, a scent that never quite left them since the fire. Finally, Raymond exhaled, reached across, and brushed a stray lock of hair from Samuel's forehead. "You ready?" The boy nodded, though readiness was a word that didn't belong to children who'd already survived too much. They stepped out. Cold air bit at their cheeks. From the back, Max jumped down, landing soft, alert, tail still but ears high. The dog looked toward the building and froze, one paw lifted, nose flaring. Raymond noticed. "Easy, partner." But Max didn't move. His gaze fixed on the classroom windows as if he could already smell the tension inside, the kind that humans called order. Inside, the school office smelled of waxed floors and paper dust. The secretary, a woman with lipstick too bright for morning, looked up with a smile practiced to kindness. "Mr. Cole, welcome. Class 3A for your son. Miss Evelyn Hart, one of our best." Her Words landed clean but hollow, like polished bullets. Raymond nodded, signed the papers. Samuel stood quietly beside him, his pinned sleeve catching the secretary's eye for half a second. She looked away too fast. Max, waiting by the door, let out a faint whine. Down the hall, the bell rang, sharp, metallic. Samuel flinched. Raymond's hand tightened on his shoulder. "Go on," he said softly. "I'll be right here." The classroom door opened. Miss Hart stood there, early 30s, blonde hair pinned tight, a pearl necklace catching light like frost. Her smile was thin and deliberate, the kind that looked practiced in mirrors. "Welcome," she said, voice sweet but cool. "Let's see how well you can keep up." A few students giggled. Desks creaked as bodies shifted. Samuel stepped inside, his eyes down. The prosthetic harness beneath his shirt strap squeaked once. He moved toward an empty seat near the window, the one closest to escape. Outside, Raymond lingered longer than he should have. Through the frosted glass, shapes moved. Laughter rose and fell, the sound foreign yet familiar. It was the same pitch soldiers used before doing something cruel. He felt Max's presence before he heard him. The dog pressed close to his leg, tail stiff, ears forward, a low vibration rolling in his chest. "Come on," Raymond whispered. But Max wouldn't turn away, his gaze fixed through that glass with the certainty of instinct. Something inside that room didn't smell right. Raymond swallowed the old reflex, the one that used to precede violence, and forced himself toward the truck. The dog followed, reluctantly, glancing back once, twice. They drove away slow. Behind them, the laughter of children carried thin through the air. High, harmless, but somehow wrong. At lunch, while Raymond fixed a fence behind the cabin, the sound of the school bell drifted faintly through the hills. Max pricked his ears, then returned to pacing, nose toward the wind. Raymond watched him and thought, even he can't believe in peace yet. He tried to shake the thought. He had promised himself that Maple Ridge would be different, that the world could still be gentle if given the chance. But gentleness, he realized, was something people declared. It wasn't something they practiced. That evening, as the sun dropped low, he parked outside the school again. The yard was empty now except for the swings moving in the wind. The classroom lights glowed faint yellow. He could see Miss Hart's silhouette at her desk, the rigid curve of her shoulders. Samuel stood nearby, head bent. Her hand moved, too sudden, too sharp, to straighten his paper. The boy didn't look up. Raymond's breath slowed, his pulse falling into that dangerous rhythm he had known before a firefight. Max, on the seat beside him, growled, soft, low, not at what he saw, but at what he sensed. Raymond looked away first. He started the engine, though he wasn't sure where to go anymore. That night, after dinner, the cabin felt too quiet. The old clock ticked like footsteps pacing. Samuel sat on the rug, sketching clumsy lines with his left hand. A house, a dog, a figure beside them. Raymond recognized it without asking. He crouched beside the boy. "That her?" Samuel nodded. She was smiling. "Yeah," Raymond whispered. "She always did." The fire popped. Shadows flickered over the boy's face. For a moment, Raymond thought he saw her too. In the curve of the smile, in the stubborn way Samuel refused to stop drawing, even when the pencil slipped. When it was time for bed, the veteran tucked the blanket tight around him. Samuel's eyes were heavy, but not peaceful. "Dad," he whispered, "do people ever stop being scared?" Raymond hesitated. "Sometimes, when they find something worth standing for." The boy nodded, though he didn't understand yet. He closed the door softly. Max sat just outside it, tail curled, watching. "Guard him," Raymond said. The dog didn't blink. Outside, frost formed again on the glass. The night wind whispered down from the ridge, carrying the faint echo of laughter from the schoolyard, a sound too far to be real. Max lifted his head, ears cutting the dark. Raymond froze mid-step. The dog's low growl rose, deep and steady, a vibration that filled the house before fading into silence. He went to the window. The school lights were distant, flickering behind the pines. No movement. Only snow beginning to fall. Still, Max wouldn't settle. His claws scratched lightly at the door, body angled toward the hill, nose lifted as if scenting smoke no one else could smell. Raymond's heart beat once, twice, old reflexes awakening. "Easy," he murmured. But Max's eyes stayed on the distance, fixed and certain, the kind of certainty that once saved lives. And somewhere beyond the trees, the faint ring of a school bell sounded again. Though no school rang at midnight, the sun rose soft and pale that Monday, spilling light over the pines like milk poured through glass. The week began with promise. Children's chatter echoing across the schoolyard, the bell's clang bright and harmless. But promises, Raymond knew, were fragile things. They could break without making a sound. The first week at Maple Ridge passed under blue skies and whispers, the kind of calm that hides the weight of waiting. Each afternoon, the pickup rumbled to a stop by the iron gate. Samuel would climb in quietly, his backpack clutched to his chest, the strap twisted as though it needed something to hold on to. At first, he said it was fine. "We read stories today," or "we drew the planets." But the words came smaller each time, thinner, like paper worn soft at the edges. His drawings, once filled with color and movement, dulled to gray lines and half-finished shapes. His smile became something that visited rarely and left early. At home, Raymond told himself this was just the shape of adjustment, the growing pains of new beginnings. Yet even as he thought it, Max paced the cabin floor, nails clicking against the wood in restless rhythm. When the boy left each morning, the dog stood at the window, nose pressed to the glass, fogging the pain with every anxious breath. He'd growl low, chest trembling, gaze fixed on the distant school, as though something there had his scent. Raymond noticed. He noticed everything, but some truths a father isn't ready to say aloud. Inside Class 3A, the air held its own kind of quiet. Miss Hart's voice floated through it like smoke, soft but heavy with something that clung. "Well done, children," she would say, her tone powdered and sweet, like chalk dust that settles but never truly leaves. Then she'd turn, eyes landing on Samuel, her smile unbroken. "Some of us," she'd add lightly, "will take a little longer, won't we?" The class would laugh, not cruelly at first, just learning the rhythm of her approval. Children mirror what adults reward. The laughter was polite at first, a ripple in calm water. Then it grew bolder, louder. Soon the scrape of chairs became the sound of a new language, one built on mockery, passed from desk to desk like a secret handshake. Samuel dropped his pencil one morning, and 20 heads turned. The small sound of wood against floor might as well have been a gunshot. Laughter followed, soft, restrained, but full of meaning. Miss Hart tapped her fingers on the desk, pretending not to notice, though her lips twitched with the faintest satisfaction. By Thursday, the whispers had shape. "He can't even tie his shoes. How does he write like that?" The words slithered under breaths, disguised as jokes. Samuel's shoulders curved inward. his left hand trembling as he tried to steady his paper. He didn't cry. He didn't tell. He simply learned to breathe quieter, to take up less space. On Friday, the assignment was simple: make a paper star. The room smelled of glue and paper, a thin joy hanging in the air. Scissors snipped like insects. Samuel worked carefully, his left hand awkward but determined. The paper bent wrong, the edge tore, his fingers slipped on the handle. A snicker from the back, high, quick. Then a voice. Guess he needs 2 chances. The laughter this time was louder, freer, no longer disguised. Even Miss Hart smiled, a slow, brittle curve. Now, she said sweetly, eyes never leaving Samuel. Let's not tease. He's doing his best. But her tone carried no warmth, only the false music of pity. Samuel lowered his head, jaw trembling. The scissors clattered to the floor, metal echoing like a cry swallowed too fast. The bell rang soon after, merciful and cruel at once. That evening, the sunset bled orange across the cabin windows. Raymond stirred soup at the stove, the air heavy with time and quiet. Samuel sat at the table, drawing, though his pencil barely touched the page. Max lay beneath the boy's feet, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. When bedtime came, Samuel climbed under the blanket without a word. Raymond sat beside him, the old habit of tucking in now an act of reassurance more than routine. He brushed the boy's hair aside, noticing faint red marks near his wrist, thin and fresh, like rope burns but smaller. Samuel whispered then, voice barely more than a breath. I'm trying, Dad. Raymond froze, the words settling heavy in the air. He wanted to say something, that trying was enough, that the world wasn't always this cruel, but the truth stuck in his throat. He just nodded, eyes tracing the small hand clutching the blanket. I know, he said finally, his voice low and steady. I know. He turned off the lamp, leaving the room in the soft amber glow from the hallway. As he closed the door, Max rose and positioned himself outside, body stretched across the threshold. The dog refused to move, ears twitching at every sound. Raymond paused, hand still on the doorknob, looking down at his old companion. You're keeping watch, he murmured. Max didn't blink. Hours passed. The cabin slept beneath the hush of the forest, the wind threading through pine needles in slow sighs. Somewhere distant, an owl called, its cry echoing through the hollow valley. Raymond dreamed uneasily, of boots in mud, of cries he couldn't silence. Then, near midnight, he woke to a sound he hadn't heard in years. Scratching. Faint at first, then desperate, claws scraping wood like urgency given voice. Max stood at the front door, body tense, tail stiff, whining low toward the darkness beyond the porch. His breath fogged the glass, muscles coiled like a bow drawn tight. Raymond swung his legs from the bed, heart thudding. What is it, boy? He whispered, though he already knew it wasn't the forest or the wind. It was direction, purpose. Max wasn't confused. He was pointing. The dog's nose pressed hard against the lower glass pane, breath leaving cloudy circles that faded fast. He gave one sharp bark, not loud but commanding, then another and another, eyes fixed on the same direction. Raymond stepped closer, following that invisible line through the night. Past the pines, past the curve of the road, the faint shape of the school roof sat against the sky, its windows dark. But somewhere in the stillness beyond, something unseen was moving. And though he couldn't name it yet, Raymond felt the old instinct return, that deep, cold awareness that lives in men who have stood too close to danger. The dog kept whining softly, body pressed to the door, every part of him facing the same dark place, the school. Raymond stood beside him, hand resting on the rough fur at his neck, listening to the rhythm of the scratching. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was warning. It was the sound of something beginning. The morning broke thin and cold, the kind that made breath visible, fragile clouds dissolving as soon as they appeared. Raymond parked the truck farther down the road this time, beyond the iron gate, half hidden beneath a line of bare birches. He told himself it was just to watch the sunrise over the ridge, but the lie was paper thin. Through the misted windshield, he could see the schoolyard waking, children bundled in coats, laughter bright but distant. And then, beyond the frost-framed window of Class 3A, movement caught his eye. Miss Hart leaned close to Samuel's desk. Too close. Her smile was gone, replaced by something tighter, thinner. Her lips moved quickly, the shape of her words cutting the air in sharp angles. Samuel's head bowed lower, shoulders tensing until he seemed to shrink into himself. Raymond couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He'd seen that posture before. Soldiers cornered by voices louder than bullets. His pulse slowed, the way it used to before combat. That unnatural calm before the storm. Max, seated upright in the passenger seat, mirrored the tension, ears flat, muscles tight beneath his sable coat. The dog's gaze fixed on the window, a faint growl curling in his throat, as if warning that something sacred was being broken. A bell rang, high and shrill. The teacher straightened, turned, and for a second her eyes flicked toward the fogged glass. Raymond leaned back, invisible again. He felt his heartbeat somewhere deep in his palms. In the silence that followed, he whispered under his breath, not a prayer, not yet, just a name. Samuel. The day moved forward with the slow ache of routine. By noon, clouds had swallowed the sun, and the playground lay beneath a dull, silver light. Near the edge of the field stood an old oak, its branches wide and gnarled, roots pushing through the frozen ground like bones that refused to stay buried. Beneath it sat Samuel, alone, tracing lines in the dirt with a stick. The patterns were strange, looping, deliberate, a map of escape routes, drawn by a boy who had no words left for pain. Two other children approached quietly, Noah Pierce and Olivia Ray. Noah was small for his age, a wiry boy of 9 with freckles like dust scattered across his nose and a shock of light brown hair that never stayed down. He wore a denim jacket, a size too big, and carried a habit of glancing over his shoulder, as though expecting to be called back. Olivia, taller and soft-spoken, wore glasses too large for her face, the thick frames magnifying her earnest eyes. Her coat was faded green corduroy, pockets frayed, one button missing. She walked with a hesitance that spoke of having learned silence early. They didn't speak at first. Olivia stopped a few steps away, knelt down, and placed half her peanut butter sandwich on the ground beside Samuel. No words, just offering. Noah crouched near them, pretending to tie his shoes, eyes darting to the others on the playground, who were pretending not to look. For a moment, the laughter of the rest of the class faded, swallowed by the wind rustling through dry leaves. The three of them sat in that quiet like refugees sharing shelter. When the bell called them back, Samuel didn't move right away. He stared at the unfinished lines in the dirt, the stick trembling slightly in his hand. Olivia reached out and touched his shoulder, quick, uncertain, then ran toward the others. Noah lingered just long enough to brush snow from the sandwich half Samuel hadn't touched, before leaving it there, a small act of defiance against cruelty. That evening, the cabin lights flickered warm against the falling dusk. Raymond sat by the table cleaning his tools, the quiet ritual of a man trying to contain chaos with motion. Samuel unpacked his bag slowly, careful as though the fabric might bruise. Books, papers, a broken pencil. At the bottom, a crumpled note, edges torn. He hesitated, then unfolded it. 4 words, written in a child's scrawl. One-armed wonder. The ink bled slightly, as though pressed too hard. The boy stared at it for a long time. No tears came, just a tightening around his eyes, the small tremor of a jaw holding back what it can't afford to release. Then, with the same care he'd shown the paper stars in class, he folded the note again and slid it under his pillow. He didn't tell. Not yet. Later that night, Max found it first. The dog had been pacing again, restless as wind against glass. He nosed through the bedding, found the paper, and pressed his muzzle against it. A low growl rose from his chest. Deep, guttural, the kind of sound that came from someplace older than memory. His eyes, in the half-light, looked almost human in their grief. Raymond entered quietly, drawn by the noise. "What's got into you, boy?" he murmured, crouching down. The note slipped loose when Max stepped aside. Raymond picked it up, unfolded it, read the words once, then again, slower. His breath left him like the last echo of a gunshot. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered, voice rough and tired, "Who taught you this kind of war, son?" He sat there for a while, elbows on knees, the note trembling between his fingers. The fire in the hearth crackled low, its light catching the edges of the paper, turning it gold and ash at once. Max settled beside him, still staring toward the boy's closed door, chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Outside, wind moved through the trees like a chorus of ghosts. Raymond folded the note carefully and slid it into his pocket. The weight of it felt heavier than it should. He looked toward the hallway, one door closed, one open, and understood that silence could wound just as surely as sound. He reached out to Max, his hand resting against the thick fur of his neck. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We'll see." The next morning came gray and cold. Frost filmed the truck windows, turning the world into a blur of pale glass. Raymond fastened the leash around Max's collar, tighter than usual. Samuel climbed into the cab, silent but steady. The road to Maple Ridge seemed longer that day, every mile echoing with the pulse of unspoken truth. At the gate, children gathered in clusters, breath puffing white in the air. The bell hadn't yet rung. Raymond crouched to adjust the leash once more. Max whined softly, tail low, eyes fixed on the building. The veteran's fingers brushed the dog's collar, and something inside him tensed. That same stillness before a storm, the one he'd lived through too many times to mistake. Then the bell rang. A bright, hollow clang that split the air. Max jerked forward, sudden, fierce. The leash slipped from Raymond's hand before he could tighten his grip. The German shepherd lunged toward the schoolyard, paws striking the gravel, body a flash of sable and motion. "Max!" Raymond shouted, but the wind caught his voice and threw it back empty. The dog's ears pinned flat, muscles coiled, moving with purpose, not fear, not confusion, toward the classroom. And in that instant, just as the second bell echoed, a sound rose from within the school. A sharp crash, the unmistakable shatter of something breaking. The world went still. Raymond was already running. The noise came first. A shattering of glass, a burst of chaos that rolled through the quiet hallways of Maple Ridge Elementary. Doors slammed, voices rose, and then, before anyone could move or understand, Max tore through the corridor like a storm breaking from the sky. His claws struck tile with the precision of instinct, his growl echoing ahead of him like thunder finding its target. Inside Class 3A, the world froze. Miss Evelyn Hart turned just in time to see the German Shepherd crash through the half-open door, sunlight flashing on his coat as papers scattered through the air like startled birds. The children screamed, chairs scraping, crayons rolling from desks. But Max wasn't wild. His movement was sharp, deliberate, born of purpose. He came to a stop between the teacher and the small boy seated near the window. Samuel sat pale, his face drained of all color. One shoe had slipped off, hanging awkwardly beneath the desk. The collar of his shirt bore a faint red print, the unmistakable outline of fingers. His breathing came shallow, the kind that lives between sobs and silence. Miss Hart stumbled back, her chair tipping behind her, hand clutching her lavender scarf. "What? What is this?" she gasped, voice cracking under its own polish. Her eyes darted between the animal and the boy, as if calculating the right tone for control. "Animals can sense excitement," she said finally, the tremor in her words betraying the calm she tried to conjure. But Max didn't move. His body formed a wall, tail stiff, shoulders squared, head low and unyielding. The sound in his throat was steady now, a deep, guttural rumble that spoke not of rage, but warning. Every inch of him radiated protection. Then came the footsteps, heavy, hurried, human. Raymond burst through the doorway, breath caught somewhere between panic and fury. "Max!" he barked, the word short, instinctive. But the dog held his ground. Only his ears flicked back, acknowledging the voice that had once commanded him through smoke and fire. The classroom had fallen silent except for the faint squeak of the ceiling fan and the distant ringing of the forgotten bell. Raymond's eyes scanned the scene, the scattered papers, the trembling teacher, the boy at the desk. Every line of his face hardened into something carved from control. He had been here before. Not this place, not this war, but this air, this stench of authority turned cruel. Miss Hart straightened, clutching at her composure like it was armor. "Mr. Cole," she began, forcing a thin smile that wavered at the edges, "I think your animal may have overreacted. Children get nervous. Perhaps he smelled fear." Raymond's gaze didn't leave hers. He stepped forward slowly, boots pressing against the tile with quiet authority. "Yes," he said, his voice low, steady. Perhaps he did. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, like something alive had entered the room and refused to leave. Noah and Olivia sat near the back, frozen in their seats. Noah's hands gripped his desk, knuckles white, while Olivia's wide eyes darted between Samuel and the dog. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. Then Miss Hart forced a laugh. Brittle, wrong. "Let's all calm down, shall we?" she said, waving her hand in a mock cheerfulness that fooled no one. Raymond's attention shifted to Samuel. The boy's head was down, his prosthetic arm resting on the desk, metal catching the afternoon light. "It's okay, son," Raymond said softly. The word son carried a tremor, part comfort, part apology. Samuel's lip quivered, but he didn't speak. The principal arrived minutes later, breathless, escorted by 2 other teachers. The hallway buzzed with rumor, children pressing their faces against glass doors. Raymond said little. He led Max out, hand firm on the collar. The dog went willingly, though every few steps he turned his head, checking, as if leaving a battlefield too soon. Outside, the air was cold, sharp, full of pine and static. Raymond stood by the truck, eyes fixed on the school building. Through the window of Class 3A, he could see movement, small, frantic shapes behind the glass. The kind of commotion that meant the story was already being rewritten. That evening, the sky burned orange before surrendering to gray. The veteran sat at his kitchen table, his old field notebook open before him, the same one that had traveled with him across deserts and oceans, carrying coordinates and names of men who never made it home. Now its pages smelled faintly of smoke and ink and memory. He wrote slowly, the letters uneven but deliberate. This isn't war, but it feels like one. The enemy just changed its uniform. The pen hung in the air for a long moment after he finished. Outside, the wind whispered against the cabin walls. Max lay near the hallway, alert but still, his head resting between his paws. The lamp's glow caught the edge of the prosthetic arm leaning against Samuel's bedside. Its dull metal gleamed softly, like a medal no one had given him. Raymond rose quietly and stood in the doorway. Samuel was asleep, or pretending to be. His breathing was slow, the kind that comes after exhaustion, not peace. Raymond wanted to reach out, to say something that would undo the world, but words were useless things in the face of scars still forming. So he let the silence speak. Hours passed. The cabin grew darker, the fire dimmed. The night wrapped the forest in a stillness so deep it bordered on unnatural. And then, faint, almost hidden beneath the sound of wind, came something else. A sob. Not Samuel's. It drifted through the open window, carried by the cold air from somewhere beyond the pines, from the direction of the school. A child's sob, small and distant, breaking against the quiet like a secret begging to be heard. Max lifted his head, ears pricking. Raymond turned toward the sound, the hair on his arms rising. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The night was listening, and the world was holding its breath again. Somewhere in the distance, the sob came once more, softer, lonelier, then faded into the dark. And in that silence, the war that wasn't won took another breath. The next morning arrived wrapped in white. Snow drifted in slow spirals through the pale air, softening every edge of Maple Ridge until the world looked briefly innocent again. Raymond's truck idled near the curb, engine murmuring like a heart that refused to rest. He sat behind the wheel, watching the frost bloom on the glass, his gloved hands unmoving. Beside him, Max sat alert, ears pricked, body tense, a sentinel forged from loyalty and instinct. Across the field, the school stood still, its windows dull with cold light. It should have been an ordinary morning, but the air carried the quiet of something waiting to be named. By noon, there was a knock at the cabin door. 3 firm raps, the kind that carry purpose, not hesitation. Raymond opened it to find Clara Bennett, the school nurse, her gray coat dusted with snowflakes that melted into dark spots against the wool. She was in her early 40s, tall and composed, with sharp brown eyes that spoke more truth than her words ever could. Her hair, pulled back neatly, framed a face lined not by age but by years of seeing too much and saying too little. "You need to see this," she said quietly. Her voice didn't waver, but her breath came out white and quick. In her hands, a folder, thick, frayed, the corners bent. When she placed it on the table, papers slipped free, spreading like a confession. Raymond glanced down. 5 files, 5 students, all from the same class, all with the same injuries, each form marked with the same single word typed neatly beside cause: accidental. He ran his thumb across the top page, eyes narrowing. A bruise near the wrist, a sprain, a fracture. The patterns aligned too neatly to be chance. Behind him, the fire cracked, sending up a spark that snapped in the stillness. Max, sitting by the hearth, let out a low rumble, not of anger, but understanding. Raymond lifted his gaze. "You knew?" "I suspected," Clara replied, her tone steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the papers. "But suspicion isn't proof. Not here. Not in a town that worships its own reflection." The silence that followed was brittle. Then, before either could speak again, another knock broke through. Lighter, hesitant. Raymond opened the door to find two small figures framed against the falling snow. Noah Pierce and Olivia Ray. Their cheeks were flushed from the cold, their coats dusted white, and in Noah's small, gloved hand was something that looked ordinary. A cheap silver recorder with a blinking red light. The boy stepped forward, his voice quiet but clear. "We recorded her." He didn't wait for permission. He pressed play. At first there was only static, the faint hum of a classroom, the scrape of chairs, a voice asking a question. Then Miss Hart's tone entered, calm and poisonous. "The world won't pity broken children forever," she said. "They must learn to earn their place." The words cracked through, the air like ice splitting underfoot. Clara inhaled sharply. Olivia's small hand found Noah's sleeve, gripping it tightly. Raymond didn't move. His jaw clenched, the muscles along his neck tightening until his voice emerged low and even, a whisper edged with steel. "Turn it off." Noah obeyed. The room fell back into quiet. The fire popped again, and the only movement came from Max, who rose slowly, pacing once before stopping beside Samuel's empty chair. The dog's growl rolled deep, primal, the kind of sound that feels ancient, not of fury, but protection that remembers what harm sounds like. Raymond took the recorder from Noah's hand, his fingers brushing the boy's glove. "You did right," he said quietly. "Both of you." Clara nodded, gathering the files again. "Tomorrow," she said, voice steadier now. "The school board meets. I'll bring this. The reports, the recording, everything." Raymond looked toward the window, where snow pressed against the glass like a ghost's breath. The firelight flickered over his face, tracing the scars time had left. "Good," he murmured. "Let them hear what silence sounds like when it's played back." The next day, the world seemed harder, sharper. The snow had stopped, leaving the streets glazed in ice and the air biting enough to burn the lungs. The community hall stood at the edge of town, a squat brick building with windows that had seen more weddings than reckonings. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a long oak table where 5 board members sat, papers neatly stacked before them. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, throwing a pale glare over everything, a light too clean for truth. Raymond sat near the back, shoulders squared, his veteran's jacket zipped to the throat. Clara sat beside him, her files spread neatly, every name, every bruise accounted for. In the front row, Noah and Olivia sat small but unflinching, their recorder resting between them like a talisman. When the meeting began, voices filled the hall, polite, bureaucratic, sterile. "A misunderstanding," someone said. "A disciplinary issue," said another. Then Clara rose. Her voice, calm and unwavering, carried across the room like a bell through fog. She spoke of patterns, of injuries, of the duty adults owe to the defenseless. Then she placed the recorder on the table. "Listen," she said simply. The board members hesitated. Then one pressed the button. Miss Hart's voice filled the hall, cold, clipped, unmistakable. "The world won't pity broken children forever. They must learn to earn their place." The sound seemed to stretch, echoing off the walls, settling heavy in every corner. The mask cracked. The illusion shattered. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. Raymond sat motionless. Beside him, Max's ears flicked once, then went still. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Miss Hart, the woman who had turned cruelty into curriculum, was removed, her title stripped, her voice now evidence against her own pretense of care. As she gathered her things, the lavender scarf still knotted neatly around her neck, she moved past Raymond without meeting his gaze, until she did. Her perfume was faintly floral, almost sweet. She leaned close enough that her words belonged only to him. "You think you saved them," she whispered, her breath cold against his ear. "But you only reminded them what fear tastes like." She smiled then, small, brittle, the smile of someone who had mistaken power for permanence. Raymond said nothing, but Max, lying at his feet, lifted his head. A growl began low and deep, spreading through the quiet hall like a current. It silenced every murmur, every shuffle, every false word that tried to follow. The woman's smile faltered. For the first time she looked afraid, and in that stillness, beneath the sterile light and the sound of the dog's growl, justice found its own kind of language, quiet, honest, and unyielding. Winter didn't end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like an old hand releasing something it had held too long. The snow in Maple Ridge turned soft and forgiving, melting into rivulets that ran down the school steps and into the thawing fields beyond. The air smelled of pine sap and wet earth, and the wind carried children's laughter again, not sharp or fearful this time, but light, full of ordinary joy. Raymond noticed the difference first from the truck window. The same building that had once seemed to hold its breath now exhaled warmth. The sound of peace, he thought, wasn't silence after all. It was the return of small, unguarded voices. The school had changed, not in its walls, but in its rhythm. A new teacher had arrived, Mr. Turner, 35, tall and unhurried, with kind eyes and the sort of steadiness that didn't need to announce itself. His shirt sleeves were always rolled up, revealing forearms marked with faint lines of old burns, the kind that came from working with tools, not violence. His voice was low, carrying the patience of a man who had learned more from listening than talking. On his first morning, he hung a small wooden sign above the blackboard, hand-carved from pine. The letters were uneven but sure. No one left behind. Samuel looked at that sign every day. His eyes lingered on it a little longer than the others. He didn't say much, but sometimes, as he packed his books or adjusted the strap of his prosthetic arm, a quiet smile would flicker, the kind that began deep inside before it reached the surface. Noah sat beside him now, always with an extra pencil ready, while Olivia kept her notebook open for the three of them to share when words felt too small. Mr. Turner treated them all as though none were less or more, and in doing so the whole class seemed to heal. Chalk dust drifted through the sunbeams like tiny ghosts of the past being erased. The laughter that once cut now carried warmth. The walls no longer listened for cruelty. They echoed learning again. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, When the snow outside had turned to light flurries, the principal called an unexpected assembly. The gymnasium smelled faintly of floor polish and crayons, the kind of scent that always preceded something hopeful. The students filed in, boots squeaking, scarves still half-tied. When Raymond entered through the side door, his coat dusted white, heads began to turn. At his side walked Max, the sable-coated German shepherd whose gait carried both authority and calm. His fur gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the small scar near his ear caught the glow like a silver thread. Children whispered, smiles blooming as the dog trotted forward, tail high but gentle, pausing every few steps as if aware that this space now belonged to laughter, not fear. The principal, an older man with round glasses and an earnest face, stepped to the podium. His voice carried the mix of pride and contrition that only comes after redemption. Sometimes, he began, heroes don't wear badges or uniforms. Sometimes they walk on four legs and remind us of what courage looks like when it chooses compassion. A cloth was lifted from the wall. Beneath it hung a bronze plaque, mounted on a wooden base of oak and pine. The words glinted softly in the light. Guardian of Maple Ridge. In honor of Max, for a heartbeat the room held still, then erupted in cheers. Small hands clapped, feet stomped, and voices rose high enough to shake the rafters. Noah and Olivia grinned at each other. Samuel's face lit up, brighter than any award could ever make it. He turned toward Max, who sat with quiet dignity beside Raymond, and whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear. Raymond lowered his head slightly, a faint smile breaking through the lines of his weathered face. He leaned down and spoke the words only his partner would understand. You earned it, partner. Max's tail thumped once against the floor, slow and deliberate, a soldier's salute. Later that evening, the sun slipped behind the ridge, leaving streaks of violet and gold across the snow. The cabin glowed with firelight. The brass plaque, a smaller replica gifted by the school, sat on the table catching every flicker of the flames. Samuel polished it carefully with his single hand, moving the cloth in patient circles. The boy's expression was calm, content. Each motion seemed to erase something unseen, some lingering shadow that had lived in his small shoulders too long. Raymond watched from his chair near the fire, the edges of a faint smile hidden beneath his breath. He didn't speak. Some moments didn't need words to exist. They just needed to be witnessed. Max lay stretched before the hearth, his body curved in quiet ease. The fire's warmth danced across his coat, painting it with the same gold that used to shine on battlefields far from here. His eyes were half closed, the deep, steady breathing of a heart that finally believed it had done enough. Outside, snow began to fall again, not heavy, not fierce, just enough to dust the ground in white and memory. On the table beside the plaque lay Raymond's old field notebook, edges worn, pages scarred by weather and time. It lay open to the last page, where his handwriting, strong, deliberate, filled the final lines. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it comes on four legs, carrying the quiet heart of a soldier who never stopped believing. He set the pen down, staring at the ink until it dried. Then he closed the book with the kind of care reserved for things that hold more than stories, things that hold redemption. Outside, the night deepened, and the sound of snow against the windows was soft as a promise. In the faint reflection on the glass, Raymond saw them all, the boy, the dog, the home rebuilt not from brick, but from trust. He reached down, resting a weathered hand on Max's head. The dog didn't stir, but his tail flicked once, as if acknowledging the unspoken truth, that not all battles end in noise. Some end here, in warmth, in quiet, in love that refuses to give up. And as the fire dimmed to embers, the last thing Raymond heard was the faint sigh of wind through the pines, carrying, perhaps, the sound of peace finally finding its way home. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They linger, not in medals, not in headlines, but in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, where courage learns to whisper instead of shout. There are men who fight wars no one sees, and dogs who guard what words cannot defend. There are children who rise each morning and choose kindness again, even when the world once turned away. And somewhere among them, the sound of faith still breathes, steady, patient, unafraid. Loyalty isn't loud. It doesn't demand to be seen. It waits by the door, watches through the night, and stands its ground when the rest of the world forgets. Perhaps that's what makes the silence sacred, not its stillness, but the love that fills it. The kind that heals, even after the storm has passed. So if you ever find yourself in the quiet, listen closely. You might just hear the echo of a heartbeat that never gave up. The sound of a soldier, a boy, and a faithful friend still keeping watch over a world that needs gentle courage most.